small group. And I think you guys would agree that when you have that group of 5, 6, 7 kiddos in front of you, you're really able to meet their needs where they are. And this was actually in the sign-up sheet if you didn't get a chance to look at it. This is our guide for today. So we are really going to be looking at those practical tips to keep the mini lesson mini. We're going to analyze and we're going to really figure out how to get to know our readers, get to know our kiddos, and to be able to monitor and to help them. We're going to look at how to design that meaningful independent work, because if I've got that small group, what are my other 18-ish kids doing, right? So we're going to look at that piece, and then we're going to look at just, okay, so now I've got that part figured out. What am I pulling? What am I doing? What are those moves? And where can I find those resources? So as I was sharing, we're really looking at today at that guided reading section.
I know where you guys are at. You're probably thinking, we've got a big elephant in the room. How do I get out of the whole group lesson? Benchmark lessons don't take the time that they say in the TRS. How am I going to get through all this? And I totally feel you, because I was teaching with Benchmark last year. So we have 10 little tips that I actually got from one of our Benchmark reps, Liz Pappas, on how to keep our whole group lesson flowing a little bit more quickly in order to free up some time to have more small groups. So first tip is to know your unit/week of instruction. And our biggest tip here is to map out your unit. So you can see we have this is our skills at a glance that you can find in your TRS. Here's some examples of different ways you can map out your unit. And while it might seem redundant, like I can just look at the skills at a glance and see what I'm going to be teaching, the process of writing it out and reorganizing it in your brain will really help you know what you're going to be teaching throughout the unit. The next tip is spiraled lesson design. So the lessons are meant to be mini lessons and just touching on a lot of things and spiraling throughout the units. And I know as a kinder and first grade teacher that's really hard, because you're like, okay, I'm afraid they're going to forget it. If I don't make sure they master retelling a story right now, are they going to remember that in 2 units? Yes, you have to trust the lesson and not try to master those skills in 1 week or even 1 unit, and wait for it to come up again. If you get through all of the units the way that they're planned, your students will learn what they need to learn by the end of the year. Tip number 3 is review and routine. This is a kinder and first grade teacher's Bible. This is found at the beginning of your TRS lesson 1. It's those first 20 days. Now this might look a little bit different depending on what system you use. You might use Daily 5, you might do centers, you might do must-dos and may-dos. So you might not need to follow this exactly. You might not like this system. I know I tried it last year, it didn't really work for me, so I came up with my own center system. But the point is go slow to go fast. At the beginning, you really need to teach those routines, and that might take a long time in order to be able to get where you need to go later on. And also remember that you might need to reteach those routines every quarter. You might be thinking, oh, this story has a really great vocab word, then I want to see if they can use the context clues and the illustrations to figure out the meaning of this unknown word. But if that's not the skill you're working on, you don't want to insert that into your lesson. So if you read the text ahead of time, you'll see where things fit in, and you'll know where you're going to be tempted to add something in, and then don't do it. You can also make sure to tab your book if you want. This is kind of a simple thing, but just tab your book for the beginning of where you're going to be meeting those student objectives throughout the text. Next one, again, kind of simple, use a timer or a stopwatch. I know that if you've been teaching for a while, you probably are like, I don't need that, but we've got a new program, and it might make your life a little bit easier. You can use your phone and keep it in your pocket so it buzzes on you. You might want to use the little green, like the green clip-on one, clip it on, or you could give it to a kid. Find a kid that you know has a hard time focusing and put them in a special chair and give you a timer and be like, you get to hold the timer, and then they hold it up for you, and it keeps them focused, and it also keeps you on time. Number 6 is stick with the student objectives. This kind of goes back to reading the text ahead of time. Even though the text might lend itself to some other teaching points and you're like, oh, this is a fantastic text and I can do something else with it, try your darndest to stick with the student objectives that are at the beginning of every lesson. These are like our success criteria that we're learning, that we are working on a lot throughout our district right now. And share these with the students ahead of time. At the beginning of your lesson, open up and say, okay, at the end of this lesson, I mean, this is obviously an upper grade one, but I'll be able to share my ideas about why we need a government. I don't think your 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds are going to talk about that, but you get the gist. Make sure that you're sharing that with them so that they can help you stay on task too. You can write them out on a chart and make a check mark when you say, oh, we've met these student objectives at the end of our lesson. Number 7 is collaborative conversations. Again, we've really been talking a lot in our district about having collaborative conversations and getting our students talking. But the important thing to know with collaborative conversations, especially with little ones, is not everybody needs to share out. We know our little ones can talk a lot, and then it'll somehow turn into something about their dog or their grandma or their weekend or something like that. So a strategy that I learned from Liz, our benchmark rep, is she said to have a runway. While the students are partner talking and you're going around listening to what they're saying and you hear something that's really excellent, you want them to share out, say, can you go stand on the runway and have maybe just a little tape line? And those are the maybe 3 people that are going to share out, okay? If you're on the runway, you're going to share out. If you didn't get to go onto the runway, you're not going to share today, but maybe another day, just to help you limit those share outs to make sure you're keeping your lessons mini. And then making sure that these checklists for collaborative conversations are found throughout our TRSs. Keeping those in the back of your mind as you're going around and listening to the students. And also sharing these with the students as you're doing the routines and reviewing routines. Number 8 is graphic organizers. This is a little bit more for the upper grades, but if you have a graphic organizer in kinder and first, we don't really have any that the students are required to fill out. But if you ever do or you decide to make one, fill out a part of it ahead of time. Maybe do an example so that you're not taking so much time of your whole group lesson with the students filling in the graphic organizer. In kinder and first, you're probably going to do your graphic organizers as a shared item, as a chart, you know, and you're going to be doing the writing to help keep it along. But if you, maybe towards the end of the year, when you're releasing a little bit more of that responsibility, give them an example. Fill out maybe one of the lines or fill out a couple of the sections so that they don't have to write quite as much, because we all know that takes a really long time. And then number 9 is remember the gradual release of responsibility. The premise is you start with your I do, which is what the teacher's doing, and that's when you're modeling in the whole group. Then you're going to do your we do, where you're doing it together. That would also be in your whole group where you're practicing something together. And then you're going to go with a partner group, you do, which is partners or small group work. That's going to be in your independent time. So that's what your kids are doing while you are teaching a small group. And then you do your independent, you do it on your own. That's also what they're practicing while you're pulling a small group. So remember, in this gradual release of responsibility, the only 2 parts that you're doing in your whole group lesson are the model and the we do together, the guided practice. The independent practice and the partner group, they should be doing that without you. You should be being able to pull a small group and be working on those kids differentiating to meet their needs for the independent practice and the small group practice. So just keep that in mind, that you don't need to go through the whole guided, the whole GER in your whole group lesson. And number 10 is teaching for transfer, kind of related to the guided release of responsibility. Your whole group lesson is where you're modeling, you're accessing the standards, you're giving them those complex texts that are at or above grade level. When you're in your small group, that's when you're able to differentiate. Give them texts at their level. That's when the students are getting their practice time. So if you're practicing, if you're modeling, retelling a narrative in your whole group lesson, then in your small group lesson, they actually get to practice that. You don't want to have them practicing that in your whole group lesson, because that would make it go a little bit too long. You want to keep it in that small group lesson time.
This section we're going to be talking about is assessments, and I personally love this piece, and we're going to be digging into foundational skills assessments as well as the informal assessments.
So now what? What do I do? How do I get started? How do I group my kids? When do I meet them? How do I evaluate where they're at and what their next steps are? At the lower levels, having to assess students a lot of the time is on one-on-one. So just finding that time and having to do it the beginning of the year, middle of the quarter, end of the quarter, you would be assessing every single day for the entire year. So based on understanding that benchmark does give us a lot of resources on assessments, formal assessments, weekly assessment, unit assessments, a lot of different assessments, even on writing and listening and speaking and all these things. We need to, what we're going to do, the purpose of our section is to highlight which assessments are going to be the ones that give you the biggest bang for your buck. Which assessments are going to be quick, that you can, if you have a newcomer, right away, Ms. Catherine is going to show you a quick way to organize and have those easy copies that you can have a newcomer, sit down 3-5 minutes, boom. You identify where the student is, what their needs are, what your next steps are going to be. So out of all those assessments, the ones highlighted, foundational skills assessments and the informal assessments are going to give us that quick overview of identifying where our students are, what their needs are, differentiate instruction, form our groups, and set the goals and the next steps for each one of our students. And it's not enough to just know a student level. Via letter, via Lexile, if we're still doing that, that's not enough. So as we move through this portion of the workshop, we're going to be asking you to tab certain sections. I know there's a table of contents, and you can easily go through that, but we will highlight for you which sections you need to, make pop out so that they're easy. But one of the sections in our formal assessments, informal assessments, is in the back on page, let me show you, page 107. And it looks like this. It's just a little table with little squares. And Benchmark gave you this as a template. You can download it from our resources online if it's easier, if it's cleaner than copying from the book. But this little table, what it is this is a recommendation for your anecdotal notes and your observations that we do on a daily basis as you walk around. You can put it on a sheet protector, you can put it with little tabs. The reason why we recommend putting it with Post-its is that you can have it on a little clipboard, tied to your hip everywhere you go. And as you notice something, you quickly can put, I usually put a date, like the date right away, the kid's name, and a quick observation. Oh, has beginning sound. Oh, is not noticing beginning sounds. Needs to work on word endings. So a really quick note that you can make. Like I said, I think it's valuable to put the date because you can see the progress, or if you put the same note in September and it's December and you're writing the same information, it's like, uh-oh, he's not moving in this skill. So that's important. So this is, you can reuse, and then when you make that little note, you can just take this out, and if you have a file on each of your students, you can just post it on there, okay? The other idea is that I like to create something like this, where it's just a folder and it's just cards, okay? And it's kind of an accordion style section, and what I do is I just put my student's name or number here, and then I have this with me the whole time, and I can quickly flip through this, find the student, and do the same thing. The date, a quick note. And that way, in one place, I can fill a lot of things for one particular student. And when the card is full, it's really easy because it just has Scotch tape on the corners, and it does, nothing happens to it. You just take it out, put it in the student's file and keep adding to it, and just put another card in the same place, so it's really easy to replace. And then you have that as your reference. Because all these little notes that you make are gonna help you make informed decisions together with your assessments. Why informal assessments? Why do we need them? It identifies students' needs and next steps. And we'll give you that tool today with easy, quick checks that we can do to identify where our students are. It helps us make informed decisions about students' progress. It helps us select materials and differentiate instruction. This also is important because it allows us to document student progress over time. And very, very important, report the progress and goals to students and to our parents. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of your informal assessment booklet, you have the table of contents. I mean, we have writing assessments, retelling, we have rubrics, we have checklists, a lot of resources, even in just this one book. But we will focus on section 3, which is our oral reading assessment. Let's tab our booklet on page 7. We can tab that because it gives us management and organization. So I think that's important, how to get us started, right? And then on page 9, we have quick check-ins, checklists. And then page 103, parent communication.
All right, so as Talia was stating, there's a lot of assessments in benchmark. But I will tell you, as somebody that have experience with all of these assessments, this is probably the book that you will use the most. We're going to be looking at how can I identify the reading level of my student. What group am I going to put this kid in? How many of you guys have already done all of the work that you need to do to get your groups together, and you have a new kid come in the door and you're like, oh my gosh, where am I going to put this kiddo? Where does he go? And these assessments that we're going to look at today, they're called level screeners. These are what these assessments are for. They're quick, they're easy, they give you an idea of what level these students are going to be at, so that then you can place them in the groups later on and do more extensive oral reading records or running records, depending on how you call them. So one thing I want to show you is there's a grade level range, and we're going to look at all the screeners today, but just so you look up here. Screener 1 is designed for kinder first. Screener 2 is designed for first and second. Screener 3 is designed for second and third. Screener 4, third through fifth. And screener 5, fifth through seventh. Now, if you already know the level of your readers, you may not have to do what's called the pre-screener. So if you guys are following along right now in the folder, go ahead and open it up, and you should be seeing page 19 in the corner is the copy. And at the very top it says section 3, oral reading assessments, level screener. Does everybody see that? This is page 19 in the informal assessments book. Please tab this page. I want you to look at this page, page 19, because it tells you exactly what you need to do. I also left for you in there, it's a page, it says masked on it. Does everybody see that page also in your folder? This is very important. You could literally just write this on a piece of paper. This is how easy this assessment is, but I made this template because it's nice to keep in there as an assessment. First step is you place a book in front of them. Do they know how to play? You ask these two questions. Do you know how? Can you pick up the book and read the book? You can see if they know if they're book ready, if they know how to pick up a book. Do they know how to turn to the page? Do they know how to begin to read? If they do, that's wonderful. That's step one. Step two, using the math. You're going to check their letter recognition skills. You'll leave this in front of the student, and the checkoff list is here on the top how it says name and then sound here on the bottom. You say, can you name the sounds for me? Or can you name the letters for me? I cannot tell you how many blank stares I have against all grade levels. And they'll say, no, the sound. No, the name of the letter. M? Yeah, that's right, M. And can you tell me the next one? You'll be surprised. M-A-S-T. And then you ask them, okay, now can you give me the sound? And you check them off as they read them to you on the top. When they give you the sound, you check them off. The most missed sound on this sheet of paper is the letter A. And you want to make sure that you note that. And if you see here this note, it says it is recommended to always administer steps 2 and 3, no matter if you know the reader or not. We always want to make sure that our kiddos know their vowel sounds. So if they go ahead and they pass those 3 steps, you're going to choose one of the screeners at your grade level. So if you're kinder, what screener, if you base on the grade level range, what screener would you administer first? Sure. If you don't know the kiddo, right? If you don't know, if you know your kid, and let's say they're a good reader, and you're in kindergarten, or and you're in 1st grade, what one would you administer? 2. These screeners are meant to give you a quick view into the student's reading level. These are short passages, and they have one follow-up comprehension question. Okay? This information allows you to get an idea of where to begin with your oral reading records. If you're following along in your packet, after you tab page 19, which are the instructions, it's very important that we read over those instructions, that we understand that we understand the levels. Also on page 19, it will give you not only the levels of all those different passages, but it will also give you the answer to the comprehension question. So make sure you have that written down. Following page 19, we have the reading behavior charts. The reading behavior charts, every single one of the reading behavior charts have a flow chart for each passage, and then it will have the next steps. I just want you guys to take a second. Take a minute. I want you to read through here on page 20 the different reading behaviors observed and next step for passage 1. There's only 2 steps. Listen to the student read the passage. And then here at the top, after it says listen to the student read the passage, if the student can't read the passage in 3 to 5 minutes, we ask them to stop, and then you can move to an easier passage. In this case, because it's Kinder 1, that would maybe going down to a foundational skills assessment, right? Super easy. And just note, this is not a test. This is a screener. Remember, this is what we're using to try to find the appropriate level for the student. And the second step is, once you've listened to that student read and you're making notes of how they're reading, you're going to look for those reading behaviors on your screener passage, or the screener for passage 1. And then you look over to the next steps, and then it will tell you what to do next. You guys are actually going to look at readers today, and you're going to practice looking at readers at all these different levels. And although you guys are in 1st grade, you may have those kiddos that are at higher levels. What do I do with this kiddo? What do I do with them? So this is a way for you to quickly identify your students. Now what I want you guys to do, I want you to glance over the screeners before we jump into practicing and listening and taking notes of listening to readers. And we're going to go ahead and use some Post-its, and we are going to tab the different screener levels. So if you guys are in your informal assessments, on page 25 is for passage 1 and 2. And I would also add on there the grade band or the grade level.
And another thing, these screeners align to the levels of your guided reading books.
Yes.
We're actually going to practice so we want you to take out of your packet the passage 1, reading behaviors and next steps, as well as passage 1. Those 2 things. Because we're going to watch a video of a student actually reading this passage. Okay? And the screens. The reason why it's important to have them, I would really recommend having them side by side, is that you right now, we're going to give you some time to kind of for yourself, think of how you would annotate. If a student is reading this passage, how would you annotate? We can do little tallies, we can write on here little notes of behaviors you observe, even from fluency, intonation, whatever you feel that you're observing that child do, besides ticking, making sure that it's correct or noting what they said instead. Or another thing that would be a recommendation, you decide right now, we're going to give you a couple of seconds to think of how you're going to do it before we practice, is to actually have the screener, and as the child is reading, make notes on this observation too. We kind of have both.
So there's several ways that you can do this. It doesn't take a lot of time, and I think that's the greatest thing, and you're actually sitting with your kiddo and you're actually being able to listen to them.
My dog likes to play. My dog likes to play ball. I like to play too.
The comprehension question was answered correctly. Anybody want to volunteer what they would do next?
Next passage.
Okay, passage 2. Thumbs up if you agree. Good. We're going to move on to passage 2. Do a quick scan over the reading behaviors for passage 2.
This seal has a text, and each and every very good cold water. It can slip in cold water too. Fat keeps the seal protective. Then it can't find food.
The comprehension question was answered incorrectly.
Look at the one above it for age. Red text with minimal difficulty, 4 to 5 errors, fluent in most places. Yeah. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I would think because for guided reading, you want it to be at an instructional level, so you wouldn't necessarily want it to be a C or a D because it's going to fly right through that. So I guess is it oral reading?
How did he do at passage 2? What were our next steps? What did you notice about those next steps, those that are the reading behaviors and the next steps that they told you in passage 2? You weren't really sure where to put them. And this is where you as the teacher probably have all the backstory and all the knowledge about the student, right? So I'm going to share with you, this student receives SIPS intervention 4 times a week. He is also a speech student. He receives speech. And he also is in small group instruction. With that background, where would you place him? Because you were even given the option in Screener 2 to place him either D or to E.
And the Screener 1, it was C or D.
C or D or level E. Because he read, he had the errors kept him in one next step, and then because he answered the question incorrectly, put him down to a lower level. So as teachers, what would you do with this student? D? Thumbs up if you would choose D. How about E? E? I would place him in E. I would place him in E just because I know the student and I know the support that he receives. I would, this is the thing, you as a teacher know the student. And when you're presented with this is where you're gonna have to readjust, maybe later, maybe you're gonna place him into E. He's receiving all that support, he probably can do it. But know that if you're struggling you're gonna have to be always following up and making sure you're reassessing them.
It's very important that when we have those students that we're testing and all of a sudden they can't even do passage 1 and they're in 3rd grade, it's like, nope, he's at a level A. It's like, then we have to ask ourselves, is it a language thing? To get a better picture of our student, is it a language thing, but he does have the skills in Spanish? And then our instruction and our focus for that student is more on that English language development and that vocabulary, because the reading skills he has, he just doesn't have the language. And it's so important for us to be able to have that full picture of our students. And we all have those students in our classrooms, you know, at least one.
This book alone, Informal Assessments, is probably one of the best resources you have right now for benchmark. It's amazing because it can be used with benchmark or across any sort of adoption that has a proposition now level.
If you look here also on page 10, an informal assessment, you have an observation checklist for your first language reading behaviors. So if you have some new kiddos that come in and they're your ELs and they're new in your class, this is a great checklist for reading behaviors for you to use to observe them on page 10.
And then the next one that, once we get into the next book of foundational skills, we can go deeper into, but you will find it in this book, so that's why I want you to tab it. It's on page 34. It's actually a blank running record. And this is very helpful because there have been questions like, hey, I have this group, and then all of a sudden I'm noticing that this student is really, now it's easy at this level. The rest of the kids I can still keep at this level, but this kid I find that, you know, I think I can push him up more. So what you don't want to keep doing is doing the same running record like at a level D and then he didn't pass it, so I'm going to give it to you again, level D. So you want to get another book of a level D, and you find these in the leveled readers, and you can easily just find the level of the book. It's on the back, and then even the running words within that book is here. And you can just grab one of these blank ones, and you can assess that student at that particular level that you have a question on, like, is he going to pass this level? Let me just try a little quick check of this running record on any of the leveled readers. This book starts the reading assessments at level D. So if it directs you to a level C or a level B, which assessment do you use? You can take one of these blank ones and one of these, and now you can assess a student at a level C or B.